So, hello everybody. We're thrilled you've joined us for today's session, To Be or Not to Be an Independent Consultant, with Liz Steblay, Pika's co-founder and chief advocate. My name is David Henschel. I'm one of Pika's co-founders, and I'll be moderating the session. Before we begin, I want to cover just a couple of quick things. First, I want to tell you very quickly about Pika, the Professional Independent Consultants of America. We're a national membership organization dedicated to helping people like you create the consulting career of your dreams. We provide the community and resources you need to be as successful as an independent consultant. Second, I want to cover a couple of housekeeping items. So, first of all, this session is being recorded, as you may notice. You're in listen-only mode, though. That's just to cut down on the background noise. And you can participate by using the Q&A feature, which you see there. You've got the option to send it anonymously. If you use the Q&A feature, only Liz and I will see your questions. You can also use the chat feature. Feel free to ask questions that way. Everybody will see who you are. If you don't mind, you can use chat as well. You have both of those options. You may need to hover your cursor over the bottom of your screen, especially if you're on a laptop, to get that toolbar to appear. Okay, so with that, let me introduce our host, Liz, Pika's co-founder and chief advocate, as I mentioned. Liz has worked in consulting for over 20 years, about 12 of those as an independent consultant. And about 10 years ago, I think actually she's now surpassed her 10-year anniversary, so congrats to Liz. She founded her first company, Proco Consulting, and that's a national talent agency that represents top-tier independent HR consultants with Fortune 500 companies. And in her role at Proco, she's coached hundreds of professionals on how to start and grow their own consulting businesses, including me, I might add, many, many years ago when I was thinking about going independent. So with that, Liz, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right. Thanks, David. But remember, you get to advance the slides for me today.
Yes, we had a little bit of a last-minute switch up on a technical glitch. So here we go. Let's see how things go here.
All right, so let's get started with an informal poll. I'd like people to go into the chat window or the Q&A window, whatever you're comfortable with, and let us know, what is your top fear or concern about being self-employed? You can just type 1 or 2 words into the chat window or Q&A window. Oh, come on, you guys. You don't have any fears or concerns? Variability of the work. Finding clients is usually the number one. Predictability of income. Some of these are coming in the Q&A window. Having a consistent stream of income. Setting appropriate rates for each job. That's hard to know what the rates are. Cash flow. Billing time versus sales time. How do I market my skill sets if I don't have a niche market? Okay, that's more about finding consistent income. There's another person says, to finding my niche, I'm good at everything. Yes, okay, so these are all very common. And based on my personal experience as an independent consultant, Dave, I really wasn't listening to you, sorry. Did you mention that I've been an independent consultant since 2004? You must have.
Yeah, for about a dozen years, right?
Yeah. So ever since 2004, and since I've been coaching hundreds of professionals over the last 10 years, I've created my own top 10 list of things to consider before taking the leap. So if you're pretty sure you're going to go for it, this is a good place for you to be, so you can go in with your eyes open. And if you're on the fence, we'll answer your questions if they come up. So we had another late entry on top fear or concern, getting approved to provide services to large tech companies. I know a lot about that because some of my best clients are tech companies. Okay, so David, let's dive into number 1. So there's 2 parts to this, and they're interrelated. So the first one is slow and erratic cash flow is probably the hardest part about being self-employed, especially if you plan to work with large companies. including large tech companies. Although large companies are used to paying higher rates, which is definitely a good thing, their payment terms are terrible. So for example, I have one tech company in Silicon Valley. It's a Fortune 500 company. They just changed their terms last year to end of accounting period 60, which means it's about 75 days before we see a check from them. So you got to be prepared to go 3 to 4 months without any income when you're just starting a project. But typically, typical billing terms are about net 45, which means that if you work 100 hours in January and bill for it on January 31st, you probably won't see any cash until the middle of March at the earliest. And the bigger the client, the longer the payment terms. So the first question you need to ask yourself is, can you live with 3 or 4 months without any income? Also, as a consultant, your cash flow is going to be erratic, depending on the type of work, the duration of your projects, and your ability to get new projects. So in the 10 years that I was an independent consulting on my own, my pre-tax income ranged from $5,000 to $28,000 a month, which is a pretty big range. Obviously, $28,000 a month was really good money, but you can't live in San Francisco on $5,000 a month. So yeah, over time, my income definitely looked like a Richter scale. So you need to be able to pay your bills in good times and bad, so you need to know that you have a safety net. So David, if you click, we'll get to the second half of this part, and that's the second part of money management is taxes. So being self-employed means you have to make your estimated tax payments 4 times a year. So that means that A, you have to figure out how much to pay, B, you have to have fairly large amounts of money available to make those payments, and C, you have to remember to make the payments to avoid penalties. So my personal estimated tax payments over the last, I don't know what, 19 years have ranged from $8,000 a quarter to $24,000 a quarter. So you got to make sure that you're organized enough to be able to manage your taxes. Also, depending on your overall income and tax planning, there's a chance that you'll pay more in tax by being self-employed, since you have to pay what's known as self-employment tax. And that's the share of Medicare and Social Security tax that an employer usually pays on your behalf. At a minimum, it's probably going to be an additional $10,000 in tax. That said, if you keep good financial records and contribute to a self-employed retirement account like a SEP IRA or solo 401k, you're likely to pay less in tax when you're self-employed. But that's a topic for a different webinar, and there's boatloads of information about this on PICA's website. So the point is that taxes can be a real pain in the neck when you're self-employed, and you got to be organized enough to deal with it about 4 times a year, or have a really good bookkeeper or accountant. So let's go on to the other next one, number 2. Dealing with uncertainty. Depending on your area of expertise and your price point, you may always have plenty of work, or you may have to go a few months between projects, which is back to my earlier point about erratic cash flow. So you got to be honest with yourself. Can you handle the stress? So for years, I tried to talk a consultant friend of mine into leaving the global consulting firm she worked for. She worked for one of the big global consulting companies. And I said, you should just go independent because you'll get off the road, you'll make more money, you'll work fewer hours. And she said, finally, she just said, Liz, I know I won't be able to handle the stress of not knowing where I'm going to get the money for the mortgage. And she's still with that global consulting firm and traveling a lot, and it's been like 15 years. But I'm the first to admit that not everyone has the stomach for it. So PICA does lead a workshop on business development, and there's a lot that goes into it. And obviously we can't get into it here, but you just got to know yourself, and if you can deal with the uncertainty of not knowing where the money's going to come from. David, number 3. So I tell this to my teenage daughter all the time. Just because you're really good at what you do doesn't mean you'll be a good consultant. A lot of consulting boils down to managing expectations, being an exceptional listener, contracting effectively, which also means clarifying the scope of the work and estimating the level of effort. So think about your work experience that may be similar to consulting. Maybe you've been a team member on a project, or maybe you were actually an internal consultant to various in-house teams or groups when you were an employee. But my point is that people who leave regular corporate jobs often have a harder time transitioning to life as an independent consultant than those who have prior consulting experience. And it has to do with scoping the project and managing the expectations. But again, PICA's here to help. So I see, David, that there's somebody wrote something in the chat, so let me take a quick look at that. Some independents take on opportunities through other agencies, so they have someone bringing them business. Yes, this is true, and I think I talk about that later. What do you think about this as a source of income? Any pitfalls or bits of advice? So yes, subcontracting through agencies is a terrific way to get started, actually. It does cost you more. In other words, they take their percent, which is usually about 35%. Some agencies charge as much as 50%, which means you're only getting paid 65% of what you're worth. So depending on the type of work you do, it might be a good idea to subcontract through agencies, or it might not be worth it. So for example, I specialized, when I was doing project work, I specialized in implementations of SAP and Oracle, real like enterprise-wide software. And my projects would last, 6, 9, 12 months. And when I ran the numbers and I said, if I give up 35% of my income to this agency, they're going to make $50,000, and they basically aren't doing anything. So I said, no, thank you. And I always just found my own work. So subcontracting can be a good way to do it. And I can't remember if it's this workshop. Actually, no, I think it's the workshop on this coming Friday. It's called Getting Started as an Independent Consultant. I talk about the pros and the cons, and I recommend some agencies to subcontract through. Okay, so that was a sidebar that came in through the Q&A. So David, let's move to number 4. So your mental outlook. So now may be the best time, or it might be the worst time to strike out on your own. I don't know what your personal situation is. I do this workshop for people in an outplacement firm about once every couple of months. And if you're just getting laid off, it might be the best time, or it might be the worst time. It depends on your mental outlook. Being laid off with a severance package can ease the help with that cash flow crunch at the beginning, because you don't have any income for 3 to 4 months, or being laid off can be demoralizing. And it takes a lot of confidence and energy to successfully strike out on your own. So you got to be honest with yourself if you're feeling confident, and if now is the time to go for it. Only you and maybe your life partner can help you with that one. David, let's move on to number 5, the big one, getting new projects. And actually, David, I think if you click again, so business development is probably the single biggest worry that consultants have, and particularly for those who are just getting started. So one way to get over the psychological hurdle is to avoid calling it sales. So I managed to do quite well for myself by constantly networking, and in my mind, I never did any business development or sales. But new clients and projects always seem to come along. And I spent a lot of time in reflection thinking about this, and I was like, why and how is that? And it's because I did a ton of networking all the flipping time. So you got to try to reframe your thinking. So as consultants, we're problem solvers, not salespeople. So if you're a natural people person, you're likely to be able to keep your network going and find new leads and projects and referrals. But if you tend not to be a natural people person, it is definitely going to be harder for you. I do want to point out that Pika has resources and workshops with practical tips for how to get good at finding your own work. In fact, we do a workshop called Business Development for Independent Consulting. But in the meantime, though, here are some things to consider. So David, let's advance the slide, because I put some tips here on the next page. So your ability to network and reach out to people can make or break your success. You don't have to be a salesperson, just a people person, as I said. But I do encourage you to really reflect on this, because the most successful independent consultants I know get their work through referrals. David, I think there's one more click here, but I'm not sure. Yes, be honest with yourself. So if it's fairly easy for you to keep in touch with people, you'll have an easier time getting new projects, but you don't have to be a salesperson. All right, tip number 6, supply and demand. So don't just roll the dice and hope for the best, but maybe get a feel for what the market's like for your skill set before you step into independent consulting. So let me give you 2 different examples. Planning and facilitating leadership offsites. I know a lot of consultants that do this and make a good living doing that, because most companies can't afford to have someone on staff to do this, or their existing staff doesn't have the skills, bandwidth, or the right relationship with the executives. So this means there's probably fairly good demand, because it's a skill set that a lot of companies can't afford to keep, full-time people for. But on the other hand, let's look at executive coaching. there are literally thousands of coaches in a given metropolitan area, and will you be able to stand out? So that's what I mean by supply and demand. So how can you gauge this? First, talk to people you know who either do what you do or who are in a position to hire people like you, and ask their opinion. Second, you can try sending out what I call a trial balloon email to colleagues you trust. So your email would say something like this: "Hey, Sue, I really value your perspective. I'm thinking of starting my own consulting practice to do XYZ. What do you think of this idea?" So there's some advantages to doing this trial balloon email. They might reply back and say, "Oh my gosh, that's a great idea. And by the way, my boss was looking for somebody that does exactly what you do." Or they might write back and say, "I don't know, are you sure this is the best time? People think that there's going to be a downturn in the economy." Anyway, it helps if you send a trial balloon email to 3 to 5 people. It'll kind of, I think it's a little bit like licking your finger and sticking it in the wind. It's likely to give you an indication of which way the wind is blowing. So I'm a huge fan of just sending the trial balloon email. And you can even do it through LinkedIn messaging because it doesn't need to be very long. All right, 7 things to consider is your marketability. It's kind of a little bit similar to supply and demand, but it also ties a little bit to the health of your network, but it's a different angle. So how likely are people to buy your services and expertise? And there's 2 things to think about. Were former colleagues, bosses, and teammates sad to see you move on to a different department or project? Did they say things like, "We're really going to miss you," or did they just say, "Good luck, see you around"? This is another one of those things where you got to really reflect and try to put yourself in their shoes, right? Similarly, David, if you click, do project managers or colleagues ask you to work with them again on something else? Are you kind of that person that always gets tapped to do the special task force or special projects kind of things? So these can be indicators of getting repeat business or referrals. Because a lot of consulting, even though it seems like you're independent, you're working with teams or with your client team or whatever. So in my first 8 years as an independent consultant, I bounced back and forth between 2 primary clients, and they kept calling me back to help with something else. So your marketability or your demand helps to ease the pressure of constantly doing business development. So yeah, getting repeat clients that's really the gift that keeps on giving. All right, so the 8th thing to consider, which maybe should be number 1, is benefits. So with Obamacare and the health exchanges, getting health insurance is less of an obstacle than it used to. At least you can get it, but it's still so bloody expensive. So obviously, if you have a spouse or domestic partner with company-sponsored health insurance, it's a lot less of a consideration than if you have to pay for your own. If you do have to pay for your own insurance, will you be able to afford it? Are higher deductibles and possibly reduced coverage a potential problem for you? Or can you go on a COBRA plan when you leave your traditional job? Although it's expensive, it's still less expensive than buying insurance on a health exchange, no matter where you look, right? So if you can go COBRA, go COBRA. And I don't know how long COBRA lasts. I think it depends on the state. It could be 18 months, or I think in some places it's even up to 2 years. When I went independent, I was actually laid off from Levi Strauss. I went COBRA for like 2 years. Then I talked to a health insurance broker, an independent guy who's paid by the insurance companies. And I was a single mom at the time. And he suggested that I get a plan for me and a separate plan for my daughter. So we had 2 individual high deductible plans. I think both of our deductibles are over $3,000, but that brought the premiums down. But I don't have a good answer for this, but it is something you have to consider, and that's for sure. David, there's one more point on this slide. Another consideration in terms of benefits is there's no paid time off. In fact, vacations are twice as expensive because you have to pay for the vacation, and you have the opportunity cost or lost income of not working on those particular days. On the other hand, you get to take more vacation days, or at least you can play golf on a weekday when it's not crowded, but it is something to consider. Okay, number 9. Do you have what it takes? It's true that as an independent consultant, your working hours are flexible, but the hours can also be erratic and demanding. And you're often a slave to your client's timeline or deadline. But it definitely depends on the type of work that you do. The best consultants I know are the ones who get referrals and repeat business. They're the type of people who do whatever it takes to get the job done and keep their word. So if you say, I'll have it to you by end of day tomorrow, which I always used to say, my end of day tomorrow is like 3 a.m., right? Because I figure they're not up yet. But I put my daughter to bed at 8 or 9, and then I'd get back to the computer by 9:30 or 10, and I'd work another 4 hours. But it took me a long time to get used to saying, before I promised that I'd have something by end of day tomorrow, I think about it, I'm like, can I get it to you 2 days from now, or is this more urgent? Because I got tired of staying up late. But you need to be the type of person that keeps their word. There's no doubt about it. Okay, last but not least, job fulfillment, which a lot of people don't really think about. But it's worth thinking about your intrinsic motivation and what inspires you, because that's part of job satisfaction, right? It's not just about the flexibility and the money. So if you answer yes to any of these questions, and I think we had a few people on the phone, so I'll actually read them. Do you like being part of a team? Do you like mentoring others? And do you like seeing how your efforts play out over time? Because when you're a consultant, you come in, you make a recommendation, you might be the type of consultant that helps implement that recommendation, but then you're gone, right? Like I used to do those SAP projects, we'd get them through go live, I'd be there for another month, and then I'm gone. I have no idea how those projects played out over time. So some people in particular really miss mentoring others and being part of a longer term team. So that's definitely something to consider. So those are my top 10 things to consider. We've got a couple extra minutes before I go to the closing slide. So you can open it up for some questions and concerns, either Q&A or in the chat. David, if you want to advance one more slide, I think it says next steps, yeah. So as with any career choice, there's a lot to consider. But the good news is that Pika's here to help. You don't need to figure it all out by yourself, which is why we created Pika. We've been there. As David mentioned, he was an independent consultant, and our other co-founder was also an independent consultant. So Pika was founded by 3 independent consultants. So we've been in your shoes. And so what are next steps, right? David, let's, obviously we think that joining Pika is the best step, because Pika is all about getting rid of your FUD, your fear, uncertainty, and doubt. We have the tools, reference guides, workshops, templates, whatever you need, informal coaching. There's a workshop this Friday called Getting Started as an Independent Consultant that you can try Pika for $39. And then if you can decide that, yeah, I'm going to go for it, I'm definitely going to do this, I'm going to take the independent consulting path, we'll credit the $39 towards your membership. So it's like a try before you buy kind of thing. And then the other workshop that's really popular is Branding to Build Your Business. And I think, I don't have the date off the top of my head, but I think that one's coming up in a couple of weeks. They're on our website, on Pika's calendar. And there's a lot more information in Pika's resource library. I'll be sending a follow-up email this afternoon with links to these workshops and to our resource library. But basically, that sums it up.
Liz, do you want to describe what the format of a workshop is?
That's a good idea. It's a lot different than this webinar, because these webinars are what I consider large format webinars where dozens of people are listening. So we don't just have people do chat and Q&A. But in the workshops, we limit the participation depending on the workshop to 10 or 12 people, and it's interactive. Like I make you introduce yourself. And we brainstorm whatever it is that we're working on, right? So it's a lot more dialogue. We also once a month hold what's called a virtual roundtable for members, and that's all dialogue. And we expect you to be on camera, and we brainstorm whatever your problem is or whatever the topic is. And that's more peer-to-peer brainstorming, and it helps to build your community too. So yes, the workshops, thanks David for bringing that up. The workshops are definitely different than these large format webinars. We do have a question that came in through the Q&A. I've got to scroll down to see it. One would think that there is more opportunity to mentor as an independent consultant. What are your thoughts? Yes and no. As a consultant on a project, you definitely are in a role to coach and mentor for sure, because you're sort of like the external voice of reason. So even if you don't call yourself a coach, you do end up coaching clients. But it's not like mentoring somebody that was a direct report or a member of your longer term team, both because the duration is shorter and the relationship is less formal, right? Now, if you wanted to like formally take on a mentor or a mentee or coach somebody, I think, yes, you might have more time to do it, but honestly, I don't know that many people that do. So maybe, so I don't know. I didn't quite answer that question very well. Yes, there might be more opportunity to mentor, but it might be harder because it's less structured. Any other questions coming in? We have another couple minutes. Okay, I think we're good. So like I mentioned, this workshop on Friday, I think it's at 75 minutes, or maybe that one's only an hour long. Most are 75 minutes, and it's getting started as an independent consultant. And that's where I talk about the pros and cons of subcontracting through agencies. We talk a little bit about how to set your initial billing rate. And it's like I said, it's informal, so we'll answer any questions that you have. But I appreciate you guys taking the time out of your day to explore the option of going independent and finding out a little bit more about Pika. We'll get that follow-up email out to you guys today. And David, there's just one more closing slide. If you advance, just because it's called independent consulting doesn't mean you have to do it on your own. That's why we created Pika. Yay. All right. Thanks everybody for joining us. I can be here for another couple minutes because I think we're ended a couple minutes early. I talked faster than usual. So if you have any lingering questions, I'm happy to answer them. Other than that, have a great day.
Thanks for joining, everybody. And we can hang out a minute to see if anybody else put something up on the Q&A or in the chat.
Not sure I quite answered that question about getting approved to provide services to large tech companies, if somebody's concerned, and I see she's still on the call here. I do lead another workshop, which is called Qualifying as a Vendor to be Paid on a 1099. And it's pretty involved, actually, because they're going to ask you about, at the minimum, they're going to ask you for your business license, your business structure, and your proof of other clients. And they're also going to require that you carry certain levels of insurance. But I go through in a lot more detail in that workshop, which is called Qualifying as a Vendor to be Paid on a 1099. There's also some articles about it on Pika's knowledge base. But I think most of that stuff is for members only. I don't think that content's open to the public. But it is tricky. All right, David, my computer just chimed that it's 9:30, my time anyway. So I think we should log off, and hopefully we'll see you guys again, maybe even this Friday, the Getting Started workshop. Have a great day.
Bye, everybody.